Look closely at the image before you. These are the ruins of Tikal, the heart of a civilization that charted the stars, mastered mathematics, and built towering pyramids that clawed at the humid jungle sky. This was the Maya. For over a millennium, they thrived across Mesoamerica, a network of sophisticated city-states bound by a shared language, religion, and a profound obsession with time. Their priests and kings, claiming to descend from the sun, ruled millions. They had the intellectual capacity of any great civilization in human history. Yet, around the 9th and 10th centuries AD, an unimaginable silence descended on the central Maya lowlands. This wasn't a gradual fade. This was a swift, catastrophic collapse. The Great Maya Collapse. Imagine the vast metropolis of Copan, a center of art and dynasty, simply emptied. The magnificent plazas fell silent. The royal courts were abandoned. The farmers, the artisans, the huge populace, they didn't stay to fight a great invading army. They didn't lie dead in the streets from a terrible plague. They just left. This is the great chilling paradox that's haunted historians for centuries. We find the cities, the grand stone temples, the hieroglyphic records, but we don't find mass graves. There's no widespread archaeological evidence of a great slaughter. The Maya didn't perish en masse. They vanished. What force was powerful enough to dismantle one of the world's most enduring and advanced societies? Was it climate? Was it war? Or was it something far more fundamental? A tragic failure of the very systems they relied upon. This is an investigation into what truly ended the classic Maya civilization. To understand the fall, we must first appreciate the height. The classic period, spanning roughly 250 to 900 AD, represents the Maya Golden Age. This wasn't one unified empire like Rome, but a tapestry of independent, intensely competitive city-states: Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, Copan. Their achievements were staggering. While Europe was experiencing its dark ages, the Maya were operating with a sophisticated mathematical understanding that included the concept of zero, a discovery centuries ahead of its time. Their astronomical prowess let them predict solar eclipses and map the cycles of Venus with breathtaking accuracy. They built their civilization in a challenging, resource-intensive environment, the dense, rain-fed lowlands. Their agriculture was brilliant. They didn't just slash and burn. They constructed vast systems of raised fields, chinampas, and elaborate canal networks to feed their millions. At the center of it all stood the Kuhula Zhao, the divine lord. These kings weren't just political leaders. They were mediators between the mortal world and the cosmos. Their authority, often celebrated on massive stone stelae, carved monuments documenting their triumphs, births, and sacrifices, was absolute. Case study: the dynasty of Palenque. Consider the ruler Kinich Yanab Pakal, or Pakal the Great. His 7th century reign marked a spectacular peak in art and architecture. The Temple of the Inscriptions, his burial pyramid, is a testament to the sophistication and political stability of his era. The carvings tell a story of eternal power, a dynasty secure in its divine right. But it's precisely this concentration of power, this reliance on an elaborate top-heavy political structure, that would prove to be a fatal flaw when the environment turned against them.
The Golden Age was built on a knife's edge of ecological and political stability. The first major theory of the collapse is a self-inflicted wound, environmental degradation. The Maya were victims of their own success. Their society demanded stone, tons of it. They needed it for their stelae, their palaces, and most crucially, for constructing their temples. The secret ingredient in their incredible masonry was lime plaster, and to make that lime, they had to burn vast quantities of wood. The lime plaster equation. Estimates suggest that to produce 1 ton of quicklime, 20 trees had to be harvested. Imagine the sheer scale of deforestation needed to build a major city like Tikal or Copan, where kilometers of temples and plazas were layered in this brilliant white plaster. The Maya were essentially stripping the lowlands bare. This relentless deforestation had 3 deadly consequences, transforming their environment from a foundation into an active enemy. Consequence 1. Soil erosion. Without tree roots to anchor the thin, nutrient-poor topsoil, the seasonal heavy rains washed the precious soil into the valleys and rivers. Agricultural yields, the very base of the civilization, began a slow, irreversible decline. Famine was no longer a distant threat. It was a creeping certainty. Consequence 2. Reduced water cycling. Trees are vital regulators of the hydrological cycle. Fewer trees meant less local rainfall and a decreased ability for the ground to retain the water that did fall. This created a paradoxical situation. Their deforestation may have actually made the later droughts worse. Case study: the Scar of Copan. Archaeological digs around the city of Copan have uncovered dramatic evidence of this environmental suicide. Pollen records from the nearby Copan Valley show a sudden and complete collapse of forest vegetation. By the late Classic period, the valley floor was choked with eroded sediments, rendering large tracts of land uncultivatable. This forced the growing population to rely on increasingly fragile, marginal lands. The royal house of Copan, obsessed with building ever larger monuments to project its fading power, was literally paving over its own future. The demand for wood wasn't just aesthetic, it was political. The kings needed the stone and the plaster to legitimize their rule. The more unstable the climate and politics became, the more frantically they built, digging a deeper environmental grave for their people. This was a slow-motion catastrophe, building pressure across the centuries. But the final straw came from a force they couldn't possibly control: the climate itself. The single most compelling physical evidence points toward a devastating, prolonged environmental shift. A series of intense droughts between 800 and 1000 AD. The Maya lowlands relied entirely on seasonal rainfall. Unlike other ancient civilizations that sprang up along great rivers like the Nile or the Tigris, the Maya had no major rivers. They depended on cenotes, natural sinkholes, and critically on storing the massive summer rains in reservoirs and man-made cisterns. When the rains failed, the entire water system failed. Scientific evidence: the lake cores. The proof lies locked in the depths of ancient lakes. Scientists have analyzed sediment cores from Lake Chichancanad and other reservoirs. These cores act like geological time capsules. Using stable isotope analysis, specifically oxygen-18, researchers can accurately measure historical precipitation levels. The findings were chilling. The late 8th and 9th centuries saw a sustained and severe reduction in annual rainfall. It wasn't just a dry season, it was a generation-long crisis. One study suggested rainfall plummeted by 50 to 70% during the peak of the collapse period. This was a mega drought, vast in scale and catastrophic in its effect. Imagine the scene in the city of Tikal. The massive aguadas, the city's main water reservoirs, begin to shrink. The complex hydraulic systems, the very arteries of the city, dry up. The crops, already stressed by poor soil, wither in the fields. The common people watch the water level drop, knowing their survival literally depended on their king's promise. The desperate prayers. The divine Lord was supposed to mediate with the rain god Chak. As the drought intensified, the kings desperately commissioned more stelae and performed more elaborate and likely more brutal bloodletting rituals, public sacrifices meant to appease the angry deities. But the rains didn't come. Case study: the last inscription. In the abandoned city of Dos Pilas, a stela was found that marked one of the last known dates of a ruling king before the city was violently abandoned. The final dates recorded on monuments across the lowlands cluster right before the peak of the drought period. After that, silence. The elaborate calendar, the ultimate expression of Maya order and control over time, suddenly stops being carved. This is the moment when faith in the system and hope itself began to dry up faster than the reservoirs. The drought didn't just kill people, it destroyed the economic and spiritual infrastructure. Without crops, there was no tribute. Without tribute, the king couldn't support the army, the priests, or the artisans. The city-states broke down, turning into desperate, isolated camps. The drought was the single greatest catalyst, turning environmental stress into social anarchy. The prevailing narrative once imagined the Maya as peaceful astronomers and philosophers. Archaeology has shattered this romantic image. The Maya world was intensely militaristic, characterized by a state of near constant ritualized conflict. In the early classic period, warfare was often about taking noble captives for sacrifice, a political tool to legitimize the ruler. But the pressure cooker of drought and environmental collapse changed the nature of war entirely. It became a desperate, zero-sum struggle for resources, for food, for water, and for control over the remaining fertile land. The fate of Dos Pilas. Perhaps the most dramatic example of this shift is the history of Dos Pilas. This city was founded by an ambitious branch of the Tikal dynasty, and for a time it flourished. But it eventually fell under the sway of its great rival, Calakmul. When the environmental and political pressures mounted, Dos Pilas found itself completely isolated. Archaeological evidence shows that the inhabitants, in a desperate final act, dismantled the very structures that celebrated their dynasty and reused the stones to build crude but massive fortification walls around the city center. This act is eloquent proof that their primary fear was no longer spiritual, it was the immediate, violent threat of their human neighbors. Despite the fortifications, Dos Pilas fell. Its collapse wasn't a slow decline, but a sudden, violent cessation of life. The site was abandoned abruptly, likely due to a final successful siege by a rival state, its residents either slaughtered or scattering into the jungle. The rise of the militaristic nobility. This era saw the collapse of the divine kingship and the rise of local military commanders. Hieroglyphs from the late period showed titles changing. The emphasis shifted from the priest-king, the Kuhul Ajar, the divine lord, to the Kuhul Chul Ajar, the holy warlord. Power flowed from the temple to the battlefield. As city-states fought for the final scraps of land and water, trade routes that had once crisscrossed the lowlands evaporated. Salt, obsidian, jade, the essential commodities of Maya civilization, could no longer move safely. Without the influx of these goods, the economy stalled. The specialized classes, artisans, scribes, lost their support, further accelerating the social fragmentation. The collapse wasn't synchronized, it was a domino effect. One city's downfall weakened its neighbors, forcing them to fight or flee. Warfare, fueled by starvation and desperation, was the instrument that finally scattered the population into the jungle, leaving the grand cities to be reclaimed by the vines.
The droughts and the wars were the symptoms, but the systemic failure of the Maya political model was the underlying disease that made the civilization so brittle. The entire structure of classic Maya society was a pyramid built on a fundamental promise: divine competence. The king was divine. His job was to guarantee the cosmos functioned correctly, ensuring the rains fell, the crops grew, and enemies were defeated. The failure of Calakmul. Consider the long-standing rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul, two superpowers of the Maya world. For centuries, their epic, continuous warfare defined the geopolitical landscape. This conflict was a massive drain on resources, both human and environmental, long before the droughts hit. When the drought arrived, the king's inability to produce rain or food exposed their claims to divinity as a lie. The people who had labored to build massive temples and monuments to honor these kings suddenly realized the rulers were powerless to prevent their starvation. This led to a widespread loss of faith and political decentralization. The common people, facing environmental collapse and endless warfare, abandoned the ceremonial centers for the countryside. They weren't migrating to another great city, they were migrating away from the entire system. The great infrastructure projects, the reservoirs, the raised fields, the ceremonial centers, all required constant, centralized maintenance and an immense labor force mobilized by the king. When the population scattered, that centralized maintenance ceased. A dry reservoir wasn't refilled. A canal choked with silt. The system quickly spiraled into terminal decline. The cities became unsustainable ghost towns. The mystery of the Maya collapse isn't solved by a single answer. It was a perfect storm, a devastating chain reaction where every factor amplified the next. Environmental stress, deforestation, and soil erosion made the population vulnerable to the sudden shock of catastrophic drought. The drought destroyed the agricultural base, leading to mass starvation and the collapse of the sacred contract between the Divine Lord and his people.
The resulting political vacuum and desperation fueled vicious, resource-driven warfare, which in turn shattered the vital trade networks. The population, disillusioned and starving, simply walked away. The great cities fell silent, not because of a sudden invasion, but because they ceased to be vital places for life. The buildings remained, but the people, the vibrant Maya culture, migrated northward and to the coasts, where access to water was more reliable, adapting and enduring. The Maya didn't disappear. The legacy of their incredible mathematics, their calendar, and their resilience lives on in the millions of Maya people who still inhabit Mesoamerica today. Their story is a powerful, cautionary tale from history, a reminder that even the most advanced civilizations are fundamentally dependent on the fragile stability of the environment, and that a climate crisis can become very quickly a terminal crisis of faith and politics.